Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 8th week of the course. 4 more weeks remain after this. I know some of us are getting a bit sleepy. Others are beginning to work again if you're a teacher. So it's my job to make sure we stay focused and have an even hand through the last month of the course when we could quickly go off course. I want no one stranded or deserted. And these are vulnerable times, these last 4 weeks. Vulnerable in an educational sense. We don't want to lose anybody. So I'm going to pay particular attention to you and your progress. Let's get started. I'm going to share about some prefixes, negative prefixes, and we're going to focus on some that you might not always use, and that's the whole point of me elaborating upon them. Now, as a matter of fact, is a great expression that we would use to express surprise about what you're going to say. So if you said, as a matter of fact, I did go on holiday, that would tell the reader, wow, I didn't know that. I thought for sure you weren't going because you were ill. And so this sort of underscores somewhat of a surprise. So you use that to suggest a surprise of in some way. Now, this first part here, I think, is excellent for speaking and discussions. You know, these are obviously meant to surprise you. Which is the wettest, London, Rome, or Barcelona? Naturally, most of us would say London because England is a city, or England is a country that rains a lot. But again, we're here to be surprised. And so you might want to look up some of these, or you might want to guess with your speaking partners, like color of the sun. It seems obvious, the answer from our human perspective, but we're probably wrong, aren't we? Probably isn't yellow. All right. It just appears that way. So, interesting tidbits here that you can talk about, or you can even ask me later if you want to on some of these. Architectural history is very interesting, and I'll just say one thing about that because I know a lot of us like looking at buildings. I love looking at buildings, and if you've been to Paris, you know how beautiful the architecture is there. Even walking down normal residential streets, you find extremely elaborate, beautiful, ornate, O-R-N-A-T-E, ornate buildings. And you're blown away. You're blown away by it. I might start to write a few of these down. But what's interesting is that some of the great structures in Europe, in the early Middle Ages, and the early modern period, and let's say modern period, but 19th century, were designed by foreigners. So if you go to the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow, you would see that, you would know that it's designed by an Italian. He was actually half Italian, half Russian. And many of the buildings outside of Italy were designed by Italians, if the country had enough money, because these were very expensive. And for the longest time in Turkey, for example, speaking not of architecture, but of art, some of the great composers and composers in residence were Italians. And so it was very common to borrow from other countries that were known for this. So architecture, obviously, it would have been from Italy. Painting, music would have been from a few countries, depending on the period, but Austria, Germanic with Beethoven and Mozart and things, and then of course Italy. So lots of interesting borrowings that went on within Europe itself, and then they would loan their talents further afield. Now, I mentioned ornate buildings. These are very elaborate and beautiful to look at. All right, now we are going to move on and go to the main lesson, which is listening and speaking. And I listened to these audio files, And the reason listening is part of this curriculum, as I've mentioned over and over again, if you understand what someone's saying, especially a native speaker, you're less nervous and you're more confident. So do take the listening seriously. Challenge yourself to see if you can understand the listenings on the first go. The first go, by the way, is a British expression. Americans might say the first time. Brits would say the first go. So, but both say go for it. But do try that. So start to challenge yourself a little bit more seriously within each exercise. In other words, listen to it once and try to answer everything. And then understand why you didn't get an answer or two. Don't worry if you don't get it. But this is, we're trying to hold ourselves up to higher and higher standards, because that's how we can measure or calibrate. Calibrate's a nice word. Our progress. You know, are we making improvements? It's my job as the teacher to make sure that you're improving. And so we calibrate or measure these things by by adjusting our, metrics very slightly. So one adjustment is to listen only once and try to answer it. Because when you're in a live conversation, you can't ask the person every time to say, could you repeat that? Now, you can do it once or twice, but if you do it every time, the conversation becomes, this is a big word, tedious for the other person. Tedious, very tiring. And we don't want to tire out our interlocutor. This is a very big word. I think this is how you spell it, or this way, interlocutor. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I got that right. But the interlocutor is an international, I think it's probably Greek and Latin origins. I sense that inter is Latin and locutor might be both Greek. But anyway, the point is, I'm sure this word is found in some of your languages. So it might not be all that new. So take these seriously. Now we're going to move down to pronunciation. And again, I encourage you, especially those, one of your motives for some of you was to improve your pronunciation. These are golden moments. Golden moments are these moments that are really special or opportunistic, perfect for the opportunity. So you can get a golden moment if you receive a job offer from your dream job, for example. Some of you may have known, I don't want to exaggerate, but Oxford University Press has recently reached out to me to be one of their, I would say, global content producers. That's a golden moment for me because I believe in the products. We're using them now. And I studied there at Oxford, and there is a relationship between the University Press and the university. So golden moments are these special moments. And I think pronunciation like this is special because even though the speaker isn't live and real, you are communicating in a sense because you're listening and having to reply in writing. So take these very seriously and think of them as experiences with a native speaker. And when you do that, I do think you'll take it more seriously, and then you'll begin to see more of the benefit. And the biggest test then will come when you're abroad, or if you live in a big city and you encounter a native speaker, and then you can test your ability to understand them right away. All right, so we have a lot of these expressions. I'm going to go ahead and read a few of these and see, because they're not given in the audio files. So let's just repeat them. What a great idea. Notice the intonation and how it moves. What a great idea. What an amazing coincidence. An amazing coincidence would be, let's say you're traveling in China, because I don't think, one person lives in China. Okay. Let's say you're traveling somewhere you've never been, and you meet someone from grade school. and you're miles away from your hometown. That's an amazing coincidence. What a pain. If someone's causing you problems, this is what you'd say about them. What a pain. What a terrible experience. Oh, gee, how annoying. How annoying. How embarrassing. My gosh, I hope he should just be quiet. How embarrassing. And finally, hope you don't have to say this very often, how weird. All right, now vocabulary. This is where I'm going to spend the bulk of my time. This is a nice phrase, bulk, B-U-L-K, bulk of my time. Looking at prefixes, because this is where we begin to literally build words. You can create new words from existing words. And so I'll let you go through number three, vocabulary on your own. It's right here, but I'm going to highlight a few things, and we're going to go to the vocabulary bank and the prefixes right now. I have taken the liberty to expand upon this lesson because I think it is so very important. And let me tell you why it's important for you, or especially if some of you are teaching for your students. A lot of these prefixes and suffixes, especially prefixes, figure in to the international exams, IELTS, TOEFL. If you have a good grasp, a firm grip on these prefixes, it will go a long way in assisting you in understanding meaning, even if you don't know exactly what the word means. You can make an educated guess. If you make an educated guess, it means you have a lot of experience, you know a little bit about this or this, and so you say, probably it means something like this. And so the more we know these prefixes and suffixes, the better we're going to be able to guess answers if we don't know exactly what they mean. So take these seriously also for your students, especially those who, as I mentioned, are interested in international exams. I cannot emphasize this enough. This is a really important skill. And you know what? If you go on YouTube and you listen to those who scored 100% on these international exams or these US university entrance exams, you'll have these people who will tell you what they did. And if it's language related, these prefixes, suffixes, Latin sort of base words, or Latin or Greek, which is where a lot of the English words derive from. If you have a good foundation in the basic Latin and Greek, and I've studied both, and the prefixes and suffixes, you almost can piece together the English language without having studied it very much, because it's just very helpful. Now, I'm not suggesting you tell your students to study Latin and Greek before they study English. Don't do it. That's too, it's a loss of time. But I am telling you you can focus on the prefixes, which are at the base Latin and Greek derived. So these are interesting. Now, I've highlighted these four, im, il, ear, in, because we're going to talk about them. Un and dis are a little bit more common. If you see un, you know it's not. If you see dis, disagree, you probably understand it's not. But some of these others aren't automatically the case, because sometimes they mean something positive or neutral. So I thought we would focus on those. Again, you have more here. I would take these very seriously. These are really good. And here's what I would do. I would, even if you don't know the meaning, I want you to make educated guesses. Don't automatically look it up in the answer key, and the answer key is below. Don't be tempted to do that. Use your own thought process, your own initiative. Make educated guesses. This is a great skill to enhance or sharpen, because it will help you later. You will gain more confidence, and you'll get better at making educated guesses the more you do it. So even if you don't know some of these, answer them and then try to find out why you missed it. But ask yourself, okay, What could anti mean in, number 8? What could anti or anti mean? We have 2 pronunciation options in this context. Now, obviously, some of these you know, but others you might not know. All right. And of course, life always has to get complicated. Just when we started to fall in love with a lesson, an English lesson, it gets complicated. And what's the complication? Look at the highlight. Some prefixes have more than one meaning, as I've just suggested a minute ago. And so that means we have to be aware. I don't recommend that you memorize everything, but if you're aware of these things, you're not surprised. You're a little bit more flexible when you go to try to understand things. So take a look at out, D and D. They're not the only ones, but these are 2 of the most common, D and out. And take a look. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to move to another one, common collocations of uncommon negative prefixes. So what I've done is I've taken the 4 I've mentioned and tried to just collate or combine or cull together common collocations that we don't often use, but I think we should use. So the im prefix here, I've listed 10 of those. So here's what I would do. Here, we can start with this. Read the collocation. So here's what I've done, because I'm thinking now as a student. And as a student, if I just give you the word impossible, which everyone here knows, then you have to memorize something. But if I give you what I consider the most common collocation with impossible, obviously there are many, but there are other options, but I'm giving you one of the most common, then we have sort of a base on which to build a sentence with. And so what you can do then is I can say impossible task. You can look below if you don't understand it, but if you already know the word or the phrase, move on. But the ones you don't, try to make sentences with them. And you know what I would do? I would send those to your speaking partner. And I would tell your speaking partner to do the same thing. You both listen and critique the other and say, that sounds like it makes sense. I'm not sure about that sentence. Use your collective knowledge to educate and grow. So, impossible task, we know. Impolite remark. That was an impolite remark he made last night at dinner. I was a bit surprised. Immeasurable impact. I'm going to make this up. It's very complimentary of me. Professor Courtney has had an immeasurable impact on my language skills, on my English. Now, that's wishful thinking. I hope that to be the case, but obviously, any great impact I have is your initiative, because ultimately you're the one responsible for learning. But if I can play a small role in that, I will be chuffed. Chuffed is a British term that I'm using. I don't use it very often, but the Brits do. If you're chuffed, you're happy or pleased. The US we do not in America use this phrase, almost very rarely, but in the US, I would be chuffed. I'd be very pleased. Impure substance, imperfect solution. All right, we can go with it. It's an imperfect solution, but we're running out of because we're running out of time. Let's run with it. Let's use it. Immovable objects. I'm staring at an immovable object in front of me. I have an amazingly beautiful architectural monument that I'm facing in the center here. And that is surely an immovable object. Impotent rage. Impotent is used in a secondary sense, often when men do not have the faculties or the faculties actually, to produce or have a baby. They might be impotent. Imbalanced diet, very common. We can have an imbalanced lifestyle. The point is this: go through these one by one. If you don't use this phrase, if you've never uttered it, spoken it, use it in a sentence in that moment. And if you can agree with your speaking partner ahead of time, record that sentence and then share with each other. And you know what? Just do it straight away, because you benefit, I think, more from the exercise if you're actively involved. If you're just reading these, it's not going to translate into spoken English. If you send a recording either to yourself or to your speaking partner, you have a better chance of saying that in a live conversation. If you just read through it passively, very difficult to translate or transfer that from passive to an active, actually speaking moment. An impersonal response, that's sometimes can be offensive. I received an impersonal response from my doctor. I was a little bit shocked. All right, that's im. We can move now to ill-advised. I've just seen here ill-advised. So ill is a prefix, and some of these I'm going to have to check. All right, so some of these, ill indicates bad or not good. And so I've just sort of grouped them. They're not strictly physical in the last part. They are somewhat social. Illegitimate child, it's not legitimate, so it happened outside of marriage. Illiberal policy is not liberal, so it's more conservative. Ill-mannered, very rude manners, impolite. Illogical, we know. Ill-advised, don't do it. That's ill-advised. I would not do that. Really, that action, that idea is ill-advised. Don't do it. Ill-tempered, that's a bad temper. Someone who has a bad temper is ill-tempered. Again, if you're not using these, use them, and I've provided an adequate collocation that you would hear or read. So you speak these in sentences. Illegal activities, illiterate. Illiterate means someone who cannot read. It comes from literary, literacy, and we have illiterate, not literate. Illicit is illegal. Licit is legal. Illicit isn't. In, perhaps common, actually. This is perhaps one that is somewhat intuitive. Active and inactive, they are naturally opposites. Inedible, something you can't eat. It's not edible, it's inedible. Insecure, people can be insecure, not just your technical device, your laptop, your phone. If a person's insecure, they're likely to be offended easily. They're insecure. So don't talk about their hair or their body or their grades at school. They're insecure. They're liable to get angry. Indefinite, inadequate, inhumane, or inhuman in this case. And then we have ear. This is, I think, one that we don't often use, so I do want you to practice these. I'm going to read them for pronunciation. Irreversible damage. They've created irreversible damage. We can't undo that. The damage has been done. Irresponsible behavior, a very common collocation. Irrational fear. Some of us have irrational fears. They're called phobias. Irreconcilable differences. This is something you would hear officially in a divorce case. We're filing for divorce, and this is one of the most common reasons. They always ask for a reason. Irreconcilable differences. We are too different, and we can't bridge the gap. Irreducible fractions, you can't reduce them, you can't make them smaller. Irrefutable evidence is something you would hear in a courtroom. This is irrefutable evidence. This is the DNA sample that matches the accused. He's guilty. It's irrefutable evidence, backed by science. Irrevocable decision, you can't take it back. Once you say I do, it's over. Or it's done. Irreplaceable, we know. Artifact is a very old, invaluable piece of culture that you can't put a price tag on. Irrecoverable loss. If you lose all your property to a hurricane, or in Hawaii, they lost it to a fire in Maui. These are irrecoverable losses. You just can't replace them. You don't have enough money, and the insurance isn't going to cover you. And finally, a sort of this is I would say a tricky question. Flammable and inflammable mean the same thing. That's strange, but it's true. Something that can easily catch on fire. There we go. All right, and then I've given you a little bit of summary in the bottom. And as an addition or a bonus, I've listed what I consider the 15 or so most common of these. I gave you about the first 7 or 6 to 9. I've listed what I consider 15, the top 15 in each category for you to have and to peruse if you want to in your free time. And I know we don't have a lot of that, but there we have it. All right, I'm going to conclude very shortly. There's a grammar task here. I'm gonna gloss over this. If you gloss over something, Gloss, you go over it very quickly because I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but I want to offer a few tidbits nonetheless. So native speakers traditionally have struggled teaching this because we don't feel often the differences that the grammarians and that the students of the second language are taught. So for example, let me look at number 3. You had better is stronger and more urgent than should and ought to. You're right. When we think about it a lot, should, it's obviously stronger than should, but ought to and had better, naturally, probably very few of us would make this distinction. But what's interesting and what is true about had better is that there is an element of warning. You'd better go or you might fail. So there is that warning element, but in terms of seriousness, ought to, had better is a little bit more, but native speakers struggle with teaching this because it's not is obvious. I don't know why, but these obligations, these modal verbs in general can be a little bit tricky because we probably use them very loosely. If you use something loosely, that means it's less precise. Loosely, it's not as precise. All right, so may I, of course, I think we do. And obviously, some of these are very polite. So may I is a very nice way of asking a question. Honestly, you don't hear it very often in today's youth culture. Give me. You would be horrified, some of you, as mothers and parents, surprised, I think everyone, how rude and vulgar students are. They just say, give me. And there's no politeness. We've sort of removed that layer of society, that level of etiquette. And so, but this is very nice. And I think good parents teach this. But may I is not commonly taught in the US. I think it should be. And so you should learn it. And if you're teaching, you should also teach it. May I use the phone? May I use the bathroom or the loo, L-O-O in Britain? May I use the loo? Occasionally, you could say, may I use the toilet? If you're not sure they understand what loo or bathroom is, toilet is international and they will understand you. Had better, we don't use in the negative. All right. Interestingly, we didn't need to book. We needn't have booked. It wasn't necessary. We needn't. This is, I think, really interesting. And again, native speakers wouldn't naturally understand this until you really dwell upon it. It wasn't necessary. We may have booked or we may not. We didn't need to book. We did it, but we didn't need to. We needn't have booked. Sorry, we didn't need to book. Yeah, to me, they're almost the same. But for sure, we needn't have booked means we already booked. But honestly, we didn't need to book, to me also suggests that we already booked. So I don't feel these differences. And so if you're talking to someone and you express one or the other, unfortunately, you can't assume they'll understand the subtle differences. So you might have to elaborate. We needn't have booked, but we did. All right, then you've got some homework. One more thing here. We don't use it isn't allowed to. It's interesting because I didn't know that. It isn't allowed to take phones. I'm sure I've heard that, but I learned something new. I didn't know we can't use it. I'm sure I've used it before. No one corrected me. So every day is a learning day. I've learned something today. with this lesson in the preparation. I want to wish all of you happy studying. Keep it light. Enjoy the learning moments. Don't get frustrated if you don't finish every lesson completely. Just enjoy the morsels of language that you are learning. Happy studying, and speak to you very soon. Bye-bye.